I drained my entire life savings to build my brother's logistics company, trusting blood over contracts. When we finally hit 1 million in revenue, they fired me, claiming I owned nothing. But they forgot one detail. The company's biggest client didn't sign with the business. He signed because of me. This is where the real game of chess begins, and trust me, silence is the loudest move you can make. Make sure you're subscribed to see how this plays out. We'd love to know, have you ever done business with family? Let us know in the comments. The fluorescent lights of the conference room had a low, persistent hum that I usually didn't notice. But today, it felt like a drill pressing directly into my temple. I was exhausted. Not the kind of tired you get after a long jog or a bad night's sleep, but a bone-deep, marrow-sucking exhaustion that comes from working 14-hour days for 18 months straight. I took a sip of lukewarm water from my travel mug and looked around the mahogany table. It was a beautiful table. I should know, I picked it out. I paid for it, just like I paid for the ergonomic chairs my family was currently sitting in. So, I said, trying to force a smile despite the nausea churning in my stomach. I had been fighting a flu for 3 days, but refused to stay home because we were closing the quarterly books. What's this emergency meeting about? Is there an issue with the sterling shipment? My older brother, Jackson, sat at the head of the table. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car, a purchase he justified as necessary for the company image. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was busy adjusting his cufflinks, pulling at the silk threads as if they were suddenly too tight. To his right sat his wife, Lydia. She was scrolling through her phone, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the glass screen. She didn't look up when I spoke. She just let out a small, bored sigh. And across from me was my father, William. He looked pained, his face drawn and gray, staring intently at a folder closed in front of him. Next to him sat my youngest sister, Riley. Riley, who was 24, had graduated with a degree in art history 2 years ago and had spent the time since backpacking through Europe on Dad's dime. She was grinning, bouncing her leg up and down with an energy that felt manic compared to the heavy silence in the room. "The sterling shipment is fine, Isabella," Jackson said finally. His voice was smooth, practiced. It was the voice he used on sales calls, not the voice of the brother I'd grown up with. "Actually, everything is fine, better than fine. The company is in a very strong position." "That's great," I said, leaning forward, ignoring the throbbing in my head. "That's what we've been working for. Once we clear the Q3 taxes, we can finally talk about that salary bump for me, right? I can't keep living off instant noodles while paying the warehouse lease." Jackson cleared his throat. He looked at William. "Dad." William didn't look up. He just nodded, a small, barely perceptible motion. Jackson turned back to me, clasping his hands on the table. "Isabella, we've been reviewing the corporate structure. We feel that the company is evolving. We're moving into a new phase, a phase that requires a different kind of leadership." I frowned, confusion clouding my feverish brain. "What do you mean?" "I run operations. I built the supply chain from scratch. Unless we're switching from logistics to baking cupcakes, I don't see how the leadership needs to change." "It's not just operations," Lydia chimed in, finally looking up from her phone. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any sisterly warmth she used to fake at Christmas dinners. "It's about culture, fit, the vibe of the office." "The vibe," I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Lydia, I manage 40 drivers and 3 international shipping lanes. I don't have time for a vibe." "See, that's the problem," Jackson interrupted, holding up a hand. "You're stressed, Bella. You're burned out. We can all see it. You look terrible." "I have the flu," I snapped. "It's more than that," Jackson said, shaking his head with mock sympathy. "You're too emotional for the executive level, and honestly, it's holding us back. We need fresh energy. We need someone who understands the modern aesthetic of business." He gestured toward Riley. I looked at my little sister. She gave me a little wave. "Hi, Bella." "Riley," I asked, looking back at Jackson, "what does Riley have to do with this?" "Riley is coming on board as the new chief operating officer," Jackson stated. The silence that followed was absolute. I felt the blood drain from my face. Excuse me, Riley, she's never worked a day in her life, let alone in logistics. She thinks fob is a type of keychain. I learn fast, Riley protested, crossing her arms. And Jackson says I have natural leadership energy. This isn't a sorority, Riley. This is $1 million. Our business? I slammed my hand on the table. Jackson, you can't be serious. You can't just replace me with her. I own 40% of this company. I am a partner. Jackson's face didn't change. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look worried. He looked smug. Actually, he said, opening the folder in front of Dad and sliding a piece of paper toward me. That's the other thing we need to discuss. I looked down at the paper. It was a termination letter, effective immediately. I don't understand, I whispered, my hands starting to tremble. You can't fire me, I'm a partner. The operating agreement says. The operating agreement, Lydia said, a cruel smile touching her lips, was never actually filed, Isabella. My heart stopped. What? The draft you signed 18 months ago, Jackson explained casually, as if discussing the weather. We never notarized it. We never sent it to the Secretary of State. We decided to keep the equity structure simple for the first few years, just me and Dad. I looked at William. Dad, is that true? You told me you filed it. You told me it was done. William finally looked at me. His eyes were wet, but his jaw was set. It's for the best, Isabella. You're not cut out for this high-pressure world. Jackson knows what he's doing. We need to keep the business in the family. I am family, I screamed, the betrayal cutting deeper than any knife. I'm your daughter. I gave you $40,000. That was every cent I had. My retirement, my savings, everything. That was an investment in your brother's future, William said, his voice hardening. Family helps family. You shouldn't expect a return on kindness. It wasn't a gift, I choked out, tears finally spilling over. It was capital for equity. There's no paper trail for equity, Jackson said, standing up. He buttoned his jacket. And as of this morning, your access to the building has been revoked. Security is waiting downstairs to escort you out. You're stealing from me, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You're stealing my money, my job, and my company. We're protecting the business, Lydia corrected, standing up to join her husband. And honestly, Isabella, you should be grateful. Now you can finally get some sleep. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It wasn't just that they were firing me, it was the realization that they had planned this from the very beginning. They had waited until the systems were built, the clients were secured, and the money was flowing. And now that the hard work was done, they were cutting the workhorse loose. The walk from the conference room to my desk felt like a funeral procession where I was both the corpse and the only mourner. My legs felt like lead. The fever was spiking again, making the office sway slightly around me, but the physical sickness was nothing compared to the hollow ache in my chest. I reached my cubicle, not an office, because I had insisted Jackson take the only private office so he could impress investors, and stared at the life I had built over the last year and a half. Photos of me and Riley at her graduation, a framed dollar bill from our first sale, a stack of complex, customs clearance forms for the sterling account that I was in the middle of processing. I need that, a voice said behind me. I turned around. It was Riley. She was holding a cardboard box that someone had clearly pre-packed for me. You need what? I asked, my voice raspy. The desk, Riley said, gesturing vaguely at my workspace. Jackson said I can have this spot until we build out the new executive suite. It has the best light for my TikToks. I stared at her, my baby sister, the one I used to babysit for free so my parents could go on dates, the one I bought a car for when she turned 16 because Dad was short on cash. Riley, I said, trying to reach her. Do you understand what they're doing? They're stealing $40,000 from me. They're ruining my career. Riley rolled her eyes, shifting her weight to one hip. God, Bella, stop being so dramatic. Dad said you were going to be like this. Jackson said he's going to give you a severance package, like 2 weeks' pay or something. That's generous considering you don't even have a contract. Generous? I let out a dry, incredulous laugh. I built this company, Riley. I'm the only one who knows how to clear the import permits for the furniture shipments. If I leave, who is going to handle the Sterling account? Riley waved a hand dismissively. How hard can it be? You just call the trucks and tell them where to go. Jackson said the software does it all anyway. The software doesn't negotiate with customs agents in Shenzhen at 3:00 a.m., I said, grabbing a personal notebook from my desk. Hey, Lydia appeared out of nowhere, snatching the notebook from my hand. Company property, that stays. That's my journal, I said, my hands balling into fists. It has CL. Ain't notes in it, Lydia sneered, flipping through it. Intellectual property, it stays. She tossed it into the trash bin next to the desk. I looked at them. My family. Jackson, watching from the doorway of his office with a cool detachment. William, who had retreated to the break room to avoid witnessing the execution. Lydia, looking at me like I was a cockroach she'd just stepped on. And Riley, already sitting in my chair, spinning it around and giggling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the desk. I wanted to tear the artwork off the walls, artwork I had painted myself to save money on decor. But then a thought struck me, a cold, clear thought that cut through the fever and the rage. I looked at the stack of customs forms on the desk. The specific documents for Mr. Sterling's upcoming massive shipment, the make or break shipment for the quarter. The shipment that required a very specific, personal authorization code that was linked not to the company tax ID, but to the personal customs broker license of the filer. Me. I looked at Jackson. So I'm out, completely. No ties, no responsibilities. Clean break, Jackson said, checking his watch. Hand over your key card. Okay, I said. The calmness of my voice surprised even me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the plastic access card. I placed it gently on the edge of the desk. Good luck, Riley, I said softly. You're going to need it. I think I'll be fine, she smirked, already opening her laptop. Bye, Bella. I picked up my purse and the small box of personal items they had allowed me, a hand lotion, a stress ball, and a picture of my dog. I walked toward the elevator. Lydia followed me, just to make sure I actually left. As the elevator doors began to slide shut, she couldn't resist one last jab. Don't worry about us, Isabella, she said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. We're going to take this company to places you couldn't even dream of. We just needed to trim the dead weight. The doors closed, severing her face from my view. I leaned my head against the cool metal of the elevator wall and closed my eyes. The tears came then, hot and fast, but beneath the sorrow, a seed of dark satisfaction was already taking root. They thought they had taken everything. They thought the software ran the business. They thought the clients were loyal to the logo on the letterhead. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. Mr. Sterling hated Jackson. He tolerated the company only because I was the one who picked up the phone. And the system they relied on, it was a house of cards, and I had just walked out with the glue. To understand why this betrayal shattered me so completely, you have to understand where that $40,000 came from. I didn't inherit it. I didn't win the lottery. I spent 7 years working on oil rigs in the North Sea as a logistics coordinator. It was brutal, freezing, dangerous work. I missed birthdays, I missed Christmases, and I missed my best friend's wedding because I was stuck on a platform in the middle of a storm. I saved every penny. I ate canned beans, wore clothes until they fell apart, and lived in a studio apartment the size of a closet when I was on land. My goal was always to come home and start something of my own, something safe, something stable. When I came back 2 years ago, Jackson was drowning. He had lost his job in real estate sales because he couldn't close deals without a bloated expense account. He had a mortgage he couldn't afford, a leased Porsche he refused to give up, and Lydia, who believed that budget was a dirty word. It was William, my dad, who sat me down at the kitchen table. "Your brother has a vision," Dad had said, his eyes pleading. "He wants to start a logistics firm. He has the contacts, Bella, but he needs the back-end support. He needs someone who knows the systems, and he needs capital." "I'm not a bank, Dad," I had told him. "That money is my future." "It's an investment," Dad had insisted. "You'll be partners, 50-50. You bring the skills and the cash, he brings the sales and the face. You'll build an empire together. Family." Family, that word was the weapon they always used against me. So I did it. I wrote the check. I set up the LLC. I bought the trucks. I negotiated the insurance. I spent nights sleeping on the warehouse floor to ensure the first shipments went out on time. And Jackson bought a new suit. He printed business cards that said Founder and CEO in gold foil. He spent his days taking potential clients out to 3-hour lunches that I'm pretty sure were just him drinking scotch with his college buddies. Lydia was worse. She appointed herself head of human resources, which mostly meant she came in at 11:00 a.m., complained about the coffee brand I bought, and spent the rest of the day online shopping for office decor. She treated me like her personal assistant. "Isabella, the printer is jammed again." She would whine from her office. "I'm negotiating a rate with a carrier, Lydia. You can fix it," I'd reply. "That's not my job description," she'd snap back. "My hands are too sensitive for toner." And then there was William, my father, the man who was supposed to be the neutral mediator. Every time I complained about Jackson's spending or Lydia's laziness, he would shut me down. "Don't be jealous, Bella," he'd say. "Jackson is under a lot of pressure. Being the face of the company is stressful. You're better at the detail work anyway. Just let him shine." I realized too late that to them, I wasn't a partner. I was a utility. I was the engine in the basement that kept the lights on so they could throw parties in the penthouse. The catalyst for my firing, I realized as I drove home that day, wasn't that I was doing a bad job. It was the opposite. We had just landed the Sterling contract. Mr. Arthur Sterling was an importer of high-end, antique European furniture. He was a grumpy, meticulous, old-school businessman who didn't trust anyone. Jackson had tried to pitch him for months and failed. Sterling had called Jackson a shiny-shoed amateur to his face. I had stepped in. I didn't try to sell him. I just fixed a problem he had with a stuck container in Le Havre. I spoke French to the port authority, sorted the paperwork, and got his goods moving in 4 hours. Sterling signed with us the next day, but he put a clause in the email. "All communications go through Isabella. I don't want to talk to the brother." That must have eaten Jackson alive. It must have driven Lydia crazy that the biggest commission of the year was credited to me. So they got rid of me. They figured the contract was signed, the ink was dry, and Sterling was locked in. They thought they could just swap Riley into my chair and Sterling wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. They were greedy, they were arrogant, and they were about to find out that in logistics, the person who controls the paperwork controls the world. For the first 3 days, I didn't leave my apartment. I lay on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the ceiling until the patterns in the plaster started to look like maps of shipping lanes. The fever broke, but the cold pit in my stomach remained. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to see the "we missed you" texts from my friends who didn't know I'd been fired. I definitely didn't want to see any notifications from the company's Slack channel, even though I knew Jackson had probably revoked my access within minutes of me leaving the building. On the 4th day, the panic set in. I checked my bank account. $1,200. That was it. Rent was due in 10 days. My car payment was due in 5. I had $40,000 of equity in a company that claimed I didn't exist, and 0 legal recourse because I had been stupid enough to trust my father when he said, "We don't need lawyers, we're family." I sat at my kitchen table, a wobbly IKEA thing, a far cry from the mahogany table I had bought for the conference room, and opened my personal laptop. I needed to update my resume. I needed to find a job, any job. I logged into my email to retrieve an old version of my CV. That's when I saw the automated notification from the Port Authority. Subject: Customs Entry Status Update Shipment 992B, Sterling Imports, Status, Hold Pending Clearance Broker on Record. Isabella Martinez. I froze. My hand hovered over the trackpad. I read the email again. Broker on record, Isabella Martinez. A slow, electric tingle started at the base of my spine and worked its way up to my neck. I opened a new tab and logged into the Customs and Border Protection portal. I used my personal credentials, my individual broker license number, and my password. There it was, the Prestige Logistics corporate account. When we started the company, Jackson had been in a rush to get our first shipment cleared. Applying for a corporate broker license took months and cost thousands of dollars we didn't have. So, I had done a temporary fix. I had linked the company's import bond to my personal individual broker license. It was a common enough practice for sole proprietors, but for a corporation, it was risky, unless the broker was a partner. I clicked through the settings. Because I was the license holder, I was the only person authorized to file entries, pay duties, or release goods. Jackson and Lydia had access to the shipping software interface, the pretty dashboard that showed them where the trucks were. But the actual legal mechanism that allowed goods to cross the border, that was me. That was my license. That was my name. And they had fired me. I sat back in my chair, a laugh bubbling up in my throat. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was sharp and jagged. "Riley," I whispered to the empty room, "I hope you're a fast learner." I didn't revoke the license. Not yet. That would be malicious and they could claim sabotage. Instead, I did absolute. Lie nothing. I simply let the system exist exactly as it was. I pulled up the tracking data for Mr. Sterling's shipment. It was a massive container of 18th century French oak armoires and delicate porcelain vases. Value: $2.4 million. It had docked in Newark that morning. Usually, I would have pre-filed the 7501 entry forms 3 days ago. The goods would be cleared before the crane even lifted the container. But I hadn't filed them. I was fired. The container was currently sitting on the dock. Every day it sat there, it accrued demurrage charges, storage fees. After the free time expired in 48 hours, the port would start charging $300 a day. After 5 days, it would jump to $600. But the money wasn't the problem. The problem was the climate control. Those antiques needed a specific humidity range. The reefer, refrigerated container needed to remain plugged in. If the port authorities flagged the container as abandoned or pending, they might unplug it to save power if the paperwork wasn't sorted. 1 week of high humidity could warp that wood and crack the porcelain. I closed my laptop. I went to the fridge, made myself a sandwich, and sat down to wait. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the gatekeeper. My phone rang 2 days later. It was Tuesday, 10:14 a.m. I looked at the screen. Jackson. I let it ring. It rang again immediately. Then a text, pick up the phone. Then another call. This time I answered. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice calm, almost sleepy. "Isabella, finally." Jackson's voice was tight, high-pitched. I could hear the background noise of the office, phones ringing, people talking. It sounded chaotic. "Why haven't you been answering your emails?" "I don't have a company email anymore, Jackson," I reminded him. "You deactivated it, remember?" "I sent it to your personal." "Never mind," he snapped. "Look, we have a small glitch with the Sterling shipment. The system is giving us an error code." "A glitch?" I asked innocently. "Yes, Riley is trying to input the clearance codes, but it keeps saying unauthorized filer. We called tech support for the software, but they said it's a licensing issue. We need your password." "My password?" "Yes, the password for the customs portal. Just text it to me." We have the trucks waiting at the port, and the drivers are charging us wait time. I took a deep breath. Jackson, I can't give you my password. That login is tied to my individual broker's license. If I give you access to file under my name when I'm not employed there, that's fraud. I could lose my license. I could go to jail. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. Don't be ridiculous, Jackson scoffed, though his voice wavered slightly. It's just a formality. We're family. Just give me the code, Bella. Stop playing games. I'm not playing games, I said firmly. I'm following the law. You fired the license holder. Therefore, Prestige Logistics no longer has a license to clear goods. You're essentially an unlicensed entity trying to import $2 million of regulated goods. What? It wasn't Jackson who spoke. It was Lydia. She must have been listening on speakerphone. That is extortion. You set this up, you trapped us. I didn't set anything up, I shot back, my grip on the phone tightening. I set up the company to run with me running it. You're the ones who decided to remove the engine while the car was doing 80 miles an hour. Listen to me, you ungrateful little. Jackson started, his voice turning into a growl. You will fix this, right now, or I will sue you for corporate sabotage. I will tell everyone in this industry that you held a client's cargo hostage. Go ahead, I challenged him. Tell them. Tell Mr. Sterling that you fired your only licensed broker 3 days before his shipment arrived because you wanted to give my salary to your wife's shopping fund. See how that conversation goes. We didn't, Jackson stammered. The container is accruing demurrage, Jackson, I said coldly. And I checked the weather. It's going to be humid in Newark tomorrow. If that wood warps, Sterling won't just fire you. He'll sue you for the value of the cargo. That's $2.4 million. Do we have that in the bank? Oh, wait, you don't. Isabella, please. Jackson's tone shifted instantly. It was pathetic. He went from bully to beggar in 3 seconds. Dad is freaking out. Riley is crying in the bathroom. Just come in. We can work something out. We'll pay you a consulting fee, $500, just to file the form. $500? I laughed. My buy-in was $40,000. My equity was 40%. You want my help? You reinstate me. Full partnership. Written contract. Notarized. We can't do that, Lydia screeched in the background. We already allocated the equity. It's done. Then the shipment sits, I said. You're destroying this family, Jackson yelled. No, Jackson, I said softly. I'm just watching. You destroy it. I hung up. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt sick, but also incredibly powerful. I had drawn a line in the sand. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. I expected it to be Jackson, or maybe Dad calling to guilt-trip me. I looked at the ID. Arthur Sterling. I stared at the phone. The client, the big fish, he wasn't supposed to call me. Jackson had told him I was on sabbatical. I answered, Mr. Sterling. Isabella, his voice was a gravelly baritone, sharp and impatient. Why is my driver telling me my container is stuck in a customs hold? I called your office and spoke to some child named Riley who told me it was a computer glitch. I don't believe in computer glitches. I believe in incompetence. What is going on? Mr. Sterling, I said, thinking fast. I couldn't lie to him. If I lied, my reputation was dead. But if I told the whole truth, it looked like messy family drama. I'm afraid I'm no longer with Prestige Logistics. I was let go earlier this week. Let go, Sterling repeated. The temperature in his voice dropped 10 degrees. Who is handling my clearance? I believe my brother, Jackson, has assigned it to the new COO, Riley. The girl who called me dude on the phone? Sterling asked. I could hear the wind buffeting the microphone. He was outside, likely at his own warehouse, waiting for goods that weren't coming. Likely, I said. Isabella, tell me the truth, Sterling demanded. Why is the cargo stuck? Jackson told me 10 minutes ago that everything was cleared and the truck was just in traffic. Is he lying to me? He is lying, I said. The entry hasn't been filed. Prestige doesn't have a valid broker's license without me. The port won't release the container until a licensed broker signs off on it. Sterling let out a string of curses that would have made my old oil rig crew blush. I have clients flying in from Milan on Friday to view those pieces. If that container isn't here by Thursday, Isabella, can you fix it? I can, I said, but I don't work for them. I can't file on their behalf. I don't care about them, Sterling roared. I care about my business. I want to meet you. Today, 1 hour, the coffee shop on 4th and Main. Bring whatever paperwork you have. The line went dead. I didn't go to the meeting unprepared. I spent the next 45 minutes digging. I still had the read-only access to the bank accounts on my phone, something Lydia had forgotten to remove because she didn't know how the banking app worked. I scrolled through the last 6 months of transactions. I had been so busy with operations, I hadn't looked closely at the miscellaneous expenses Jackson filed. I found it. It wasn't just suits, it was online gambling. BetMGM, DraftKings, PokerStars, thousands of dollars, $3,000 on a Tuesday, $5,000 on a Friday. And then, a transfer of $15,000 to L Design LLC, a shell company I knew Lydia had set up years ago for a decorating business that never launched. They hadn't just fired me to cut costs. They had fired me because they were bleeding the company dry and they knew I was about to audit the books for tax season. If I had stayed another week, I would have found the theft. I printed screenshots. I put them in a folder. I put on my best blazer, the one I bought for my first interview, and drove to the coffee shop. When I walked in, Mr. Sterling was already there, but he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him, looking small and pale, was my father, William. Sterling must have called him. "Sit down," Sterling commanded. He didn't offer a handshake. I sat. My father looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Bella, please, Mr. Sterling is very upset. We just need to get this shipment moved. Jackson is willing to rehire you. We can talk about a raise." "A raise?" Sterling scoffed. He looked at my father with pure disgust. "Your son lied to me, William. He told me the goods were cleared. He told me Isabella was on vacation. Now I find out he fired the only competent person in your organization." "It was a restructuring," Dad mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "A misunderstanding regarding equity." "Dad," I said, sliding the folder across the table toward him. "It wasn't a restructuring, it was a cover-up." William looked at the folder. He opened it. I watched his eyes scan the lines, the gambling debts, the transfers to Lydia, the siphoning of the operating capital I had worked myself to the bone to build. "What is this?" Dad whispered. "Jackson has gambled away nearly $30,000 of company money in the last 4 months, I said calmly. "And Lydia took $15,000 for consulting. That's why there was no money for my raise. That's why they fired me. They needed me gone before I saw the Q3 bank statements." William's hands shook. "Number Jackson wouldn't. He said the market was tough. He said overhead was high." "The overhead is his blackjack." "Habit, Dad," I said. Sterling leaned forward, looking at the papers over Dad's shoulder. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "You're insolvent. If I pull my contract, you're bankrupt tomorrow." "Mr. Sterling, please," Dad stammered, his loyalty to his son still fighting against the reality in front of him. "Give us a chance to fix it. Jackson is young, he made mistakes, but we're family. Isabella will help us. Won't you, honey, for the family?" I looked at my father, a man I had idolized my whole life. A man who was currently asking me to clean up his son's mess, to work for a thief who had humiliated me, just to keep up appearances. He still didn't get it. He still chose Jackson. Even with the proof of theft in his hands, his instinct was to protect the son and ask the daughter to sacrifice. "No, Dad," I said, my voice didn't shake. "I won't." "You'd let the business fail?" Dad asked, his voice trembling with anger now. "You'd let your brother lose his house, after everything we did for you." "You didn't do anything for me," I said. "I did everything for you, and you threw me out like trash. I turned to Mr. Sterling. I can't clear the shipment as an employee of Prestige Logistics, I said, but I can clear it as the owner of my own brokerage. Sterling raised an eyebrow. Do you have your own brokerage? I have the license, I said. I can file the change of broker form right now. You sign it. It revokes Prestige's power of attorney and grants it to me, Isabella Martinez, independent broker. And what happens to Prestige? Sterling asked, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. They lose the contract, I said. They lose the revenue, they lose the client. Do it, Sterling said. He pulled a gold pen from his pocket. Bella, no, Dad stood up, knocking his chair over. You can't do this, that's your brother, that's your inheritance. My inheritance was the $40,000 you let him steal, I said, pulling the documents out of my bag. I placed the change of broker form on the table. The noise of the coffee shop seemed to fade away. It was just me, the paper, and the pen. The change of broker form was signed at 2:15 p.m. By 2:30 p.m., I had filed the electronic update with Customs and Border Protection. By 3:00 p.m., the hold status on Mr. Sterling's container vanished. But the real explosion happened at 4:00 p.m. I was still sitting in the coffee shop with Mr. Sterling, who had insisted on buying me lunch while we went over the logistics for his future shipments. My phone started buzzing. Then Dad's phone, which was sitting on the table where he had left it after storming out to call Jackson, started ringing. Then the door to the coffee shop flew open. Jackson marched in. He looked deranged. His tie was undone, his hair was messy, and his face was a mottled red. Lydia was right behind him, looking terrified, and Riley was trailing them, filming the whole thing on her phone, because of course she was. You, Jackson screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. The entire coffee shop went silent. You hacked the system, you stole my client. Lower your voice, Mr. Sterling said, not even looking up from his croissant. You are embarrassing yourself. She stole from me, Jackson yelled, slamming his hands onto our table. That shipment belongs to Prestige Logistics. That is my revenue. Actually, I said, calmly taking a sip of my latte, the bill of lading lists the consignee as Sterling Imports. Mr. Sterling owns the cargo. He has the right to choose his broker. He chose me. I am suing you, Lydia shrieked, stepping forward. We have a non-compete. You can't steal clients. I don't have a non-compete, I reminded her. I don't have a contract at all. Remember, you said we kept it simple. No paperwork means no restrictions. Jackson looked like he was going to hit me. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You unfix this. Right now, you transfer it back. Get your hands off her. Sterling stood up. He was 60 years old, but he was a big man, and he had the commanding presence of someone who had negotiated with sharks his whole life. He loomed over Jackson. If you touch my broker again, I will have you arrested for assault. Jackson froze. He let go of my arm, stepping back. Your broker, Jackson whispered. Isabella is now the exclusive logistics provider for Sterling Imports, Mr. Sterling announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the shop. I have just signed a 3-year contract with her directly. Prestige Logistics is fired, effective immediately. You can't, Jackson stammered. That contract is that's 80% of our revenue. Then you should have treated the person who secured it with more respect, Sterling said coldly. Dad, Jackson turned to William, who had just walked back in from the parking lot looking defeated. Do something, tell him she's lying. William looked at his son, he looked. At the folder of bank statements still sitting on the table, the proof of the gambling, the theft, the lies. I saw the statements, Jackson, Dad said quietly. What? Jackson's face went pale. The gambling, Dad said, his voice cracking. The money to Lydia. You told me the business was struggling because of the market. You told me Isabella was the problem, but it was you. You stole her money. You stole my money. It was an investment strategy, Jackson tried to argue, but the desperation in his voice gave him away. I was going to win it back. I had a system. You gambled with our family, Dad said, tears streaming down his face. You fired your sister to cover your tracks. Lydia tried to intervene. William, don't be dramatic. We can fix this. We just need a bridge loan. No, William said, backing away from them. No more loans. I mortgaged my house for this company. If Sterling leaves, I lose everything too. You should have thought of that when you let them fire me, I said. It was harsh, but it needed to be said. I tried to tell you, Dad. You wouldn't listen. Isabella, Jackson pleaded, falling to his knees, actually on his knees on the dirty coffee shop floor. Please, I have the Porsche payment, the house. Lydia just bought a new kitchen. If we lose this revenue, we're done. Just bring the contract back to Prestige. I'll give you 10% equity. I looked down at him, my big brother, the one who used to protect me on the playground. Now, just a greedy, hollow shell of a man. I don't want 10% of a sinking ship, Jackson, I said, and I don't work with thieves. I'm your brother, he wailed. No, I said, standing up and gathering my things. You're just a former employer. I turned to Mr. Sterling. Shall we go? We have a container to clear. After you, Sterling said, smiling. We walked out. Behind us, I heard Riley say, so, does this mean I'm not the COO anymore? The fallout was swift and brutal. Without the Sterling revenue, Prestige Logistics couldn't cover its operating costs. The lease on the warehouse was terminated within a month. The trucks were repossessed. Jackson's Porsche was the first personal asset to go, followed quickly by his house. The gambling debts were significant enough that Jackson faced potential fraud charges from the other minor investors he had duped. Last I heard, he and Lydia had moved into a small apartment in a bad part of town, and Jackson was working as a car salesman, a job he hated because he actually had to work for his commission. Dad lost a significant chunk of his retirement savings when the company folded, but he didn't lose his house. I made sure of that. I used the profits from my first quarter with Sterling to pay off his mortgage. He didn't want to take the money. He cried when I gave him the check. I don't deserve this, Bella, he had sobbed at my kitchen table. I chose the wrong child. You did, I told him honestly. But you're still my dad, and I'm not Jackson. I don't leave family behind. Our relationship is rebuilding, slowly. He comes over for dinner on Sundays, but we don't talk about business. And we definitely don't talk about Jackson. As for me, I didn't rebuild Prestige. I built something better. I started IM Logistics. It's small, lean, no fancy office, no mahogany tables, no useless chief vibe officers. Just me, 2 assistants, and a roster of loyal clients who followed Mr. Sterling when they heard what happened. I work hard, I still have long days, but every dollar I make goes into my account. Every success is mine, and every decision is mine. 6 months after the collapse, I got a text from an unknown number. Hey sis, can I get a job? I'm really good at TikTok. I smiled, blocked the number, and went back to work. Patience, it turns out, really does pay. But owning your own worth, that's priceless.